we hunt for solutions to our energy needs, there's a simple ingredient that's raising our hopes. It's not animal, it's not mineral, it's not really vegetable. But it's all around us. Correspondent Andrea Kissick investigates the slimy life form that might provide a promising carbon-neutral fuel for the future.
So, what do this, and this have in common? Brace yourself, they're all algae. The Earth is home to over 30,000 species of algae, a family of bizarre organisms that are neither plant nor animal. You'll find them from the tropics to the poles. Some are bigger than you, others are too tiny to see with the naked eye. And thanks to a few of the tiniest ones, someday you just might be using algae to fuel your car. What's so cool about algae?
Well, algae are basically very efficient solar energy converters, converting this energy of the sun into biomass. They're pretty much everywhere you look. And I can even hold a petri dish out the window here and catch algae right out of the air, which I can take back to my lab and grow in a growth chamber with lights.
So how many of these ancient organisms did we get from sticking our dish out the window for 3 minutes?
You can see there are a lot of colonies on this plate, and I see a couple of green colonies here. So those are some algae that we caught.
And on a good day, how many strains would you expect to find?
Basically, half a dozen colonies would be a good day for algae.
And a good day for algae is a good day for humans. If algae hadn't started breathing in carbon dioxide and exhaling oxygen 3.5 billion years ago, none of us would be here.
If algae had never come along and produced oxygen for the Earth's atmosphere, humans would never exist.
Like most plants, algae have mastered a process called photosynthesis. Basically, algae act like little factories. They use the energy and sunlight to pull damaging carbon dioxide out of the air. Then they break down water to manufacture that CO2 into sugars and fats and spew oxygen into the air as a waste product. But for the algae, those sugars and fats are what it's all about. They use most of these raw materials to assemble more algae, lots more.
So they can double themselves, in some cases more than once per day.
Wow, so it's really gobbling up the CO2.
Yeah. But in certain situations, algae are a bit like us. They can overeat sun energy, and they end up storing the extra energy as oily fat, kind of an algae spare tire.
And what can we do with that oil?
Well, that oil, in many cases, can be very easily converted into biodiesel.
And unlike fossil fuels, burning algae-based fuels wouldn't release any new greenhouse gases.
Ideally, the overall process will be carbon neutral. The algae take up carbon dioxide, then that carbon dioxide gets re-released with no net increase in the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
It sounds great as a concept, but it's still not quite ready for prime time. For one thing, algae don't want to give up their precious oil, and they've developed a pretty tough skin to protect it. Getting the oil out isn't easy, and before you can do that, you need to start with a serious volume of algae. And that requires land. How much land? This'll give you an idea. On the inner shoreline of San Francisco Bay is a network of strangely colored, shallow man-made ponds. They're actually massive salt reclamation ponds. But the crazy colors come to you courtesy of various families of wild algae that grow near the surface.
So this is kind of what open algae ponds look like.
It is in terms of size and space it would take up.
Massive open ponds have long been considered the cheapest way to grow algae for biofuels. But oil used to be so cheap, it just wasn't worth the effort. Well, that era's over, and algae oil companies like Bob Walsh's Aurora Biofuels are up to their knees in open algae ponds again.
Our vision is you're going to have several thousand acres that will produce 120 million gallons a year, and using salt water and land that's barren land, food can't grow.
On paper, algae biofuels seem like the answer to everyone's questions. But algae aren't the first biofuel source to be sold as the answer to everything. Remember corn ethanol?
No magic bullet.
I visited San Francisco's Mission District to get a taste of corn ethanol's dark side.
The issue is that the biofuels are made from the same things as that food is made from today. Things like corn or soybeans. And what we're finding is that is leading to rapid increases in food prices.
In fact, the 2007 U.S. ethanol mandate translated to a 400% increase in the price of corn tortillas, sparking protests in Mexico and elsewhere. And the dangerous chain reaction continued from there. To cover for U.S. farmland that had changed over to biofuel crops, countries all over the world took up the slack by dedicating new lands to food crops, and they cut down and burned rainforests to do it. But consider this. Burning cleared forests already contributes more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere than the total exhaust from every vehicle in the world.
Decisions that we make here in the United States are affecting things from food to forest. When we fuel our cars up with biofuels, we are effectively burning rainforests in our gas tanks.
But algae ponds are different, aren't they? You don't have to clear forests for them, and algae can grow in brackish or saltwater. You can build ponds where you can't grow crops. But algae takes up a lot of space, usually far from the city.
And the city is where you find factories and power plants, the most concentrated source of algae's favorite food, CO2. Unfortunately, open algae ponds don't fit well in a landscape like this. But there are ways to grow your algae indoors. Just plop down an industrial warehouse next to a factory. Then pipe the CO2 belched out of the factory's smokestacks straight to the hungry algae in the warehouse. And inside the warehouse, you might find something like this. It's a working prototype of a device called a photobioreactor.
Oh, wow. These are wild. So why all the colored lights?
The colors are because algae is receptive to blue and red and really doesn't want to have full spectrum light. The UV in the full sunlight is actually damaging the algae.
Origin Oil's idea is to scale up the individual containers to 10,000 gallons each. A setup like this could generate 1,000 gallons of algae oil per acre per day. The Helix bioreactor is pretty flashy packaging. Some algae scientists call it a techno-toy that's just too expensive to provide a large-scale solution. And think about this. If algae biofuels are about harnessing the sun, where's the solar source?
The devil's bargain in indoor production of algae is that you are now going to go away from direct sunlight. You've got lights, pumps, chillers, and all these things add up to an energy penalty.
For Eccleberry, the added energy cost of supplying indoor light and climate control are worth paying when you compare it to the total energy produced by his algae well. So, how soon are we going to run high-powered vehicles like jets on algae biofuel? The answer? Now. In January of 2009, jet fuel refined partly from algae oil was used to power a 2-hour experimental flight. For the growing number of algae biofuel startups around the globe, it was a shining proof of concept. But considering that algae biofuels currently weigh in at a whopping $8 per gallon, it's a pretty tough vision to sell right now. Still, when weighed against the other biofuels options, it's hard not to get excited about algae's future.
Vegetation is fuel.
Algae has a great deal of potential, and part of the reason is that it overcomes some of these limitations we saw with the crop-based or land-based biofuels. We need to be cautious as we move forward. We need to think about some of the unintended consequences, the ripple effects or chain reactions that we might not be thinking of on the surface. I mean, 10 years from now, what is this going to look like?
From pond scum to power source, it sounds too good to be true. And it may be. It's still unclear if there's enough land to use open ponds effectively, or if photobioreactors are just too expensive to scale up to factory size. Still, at the risk of being over-optimistic, isn't there something poetic about the possibility that last week's lowly slime, sushi, face cream, may just turn out to be next week's future fuel?
Dinosaur fossils.
Rock. Dinosaurs.
From Venezuela. From decaying things in the earth.
It would stay in the ground.
I don't think anything would happen.
That's a good question. I don't know.